right. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started. The purpose of today's meeting is we wanted to bring in departmental officials and hear about protected areas, get a bit of an update on where we're at with protected areas and financing. I think that for me, one of the really exciting things that we did early on in our mandate as this committee was look to protected areas, and there has been some action and investments made by the government on supporting protected areas in Canada. And so the committee had expressed a desire to have departmental officials back and just give us an update on where we're at on rolling out some of the programs and things. So that's really the purpose of the meeting today. We have a couple of guests. Mr. Hogue, welcome on the government side of things.
Why, thank you.
And then we have Mr. Ablatif and Mr. Hoback, who will be joining us on the Conservative side.
Thanks for having me.
And welcome. And so for each of we'll have the government officials. Welcome back, by the way. We have many familiar faces, and you've been with us many times over the past almost 4 years, so it's good to see everybody back. And we'll give you up to 10 minutes for opening statements for each of the agencies. So however you'd like to organize, maybe if we start on my left, your right, and we'll just work our way across for opening statements. We use the card system. I'm sure you've all seen this before, but when there's 1 minute left, I'll raise the yellow card. When you're out of time, I'll give you the red card. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up your thought, and then we'll move on to the next person. And the same applies for when we're going through our questions and answers. So whoever would like to start, please
Thank you,
lead
Chair.
us off.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to be here today, and thank you to the Vice Chair and the members of the committee for having us here to speak to an update on our current work on protected areas in Canada. My name is Niall O'Day, and I'm the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for the Canadian Wildlife Service, branch of Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm joined by Mark Couchy, who's our Director General of Protected Areas at the Wildlife Service, as well, of course, by our esteemed colleagues from Parks, Michael Nadler and David Murray. I'd like to start by thanking this committee for the unanimously supported 2017 report taking action today, establishing protected areas for Canada's future. Les initiatives que je décrirai concordent en tout point l'objectif des recommandations dans votre...
The initiatives that I'll talk about are in keeping with the objective of the recommendations in that report, which was, to quote, to help Canada rapidly increase the extent of its protected spaces in a coordinated and equitable manner.
The report of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, released on May 6th, observed with alarm that biodiversity continues to decline in every region of the world, significantly reducing the Earth's capacity to contribute to our well-being. The international report also identified the expansion and strengthening of ecologically representative and well-connected protected areas networks, as well as other effective area-based conservation measures as an effective policy response. With 20% of the world's freshwater resources, 24% of its wetlands, 25% of its temperate rainforest, and 33% of its remaining boreal forest, Canada has a unique opportunity to lead the transformative change called for in the international report. Canadians are facing the impacts of climate change itself, and so is nature. Our efforts to establish new protected areas also provide an important contribution to addressing climate change, supporting resilience to climate impacts for both nature and people, and protecting critically important carbon stores in our peatlands, wetlands, and forests. In Budget 2018, tabled about a year following the publication of your report, the federal government announced an historic investment of $1.3 billion in nature conservation, known as the Nature Legacy. Il s'agit d'un des plus importants investissements dans la conservation de la nature.
This was the single largest investment in the conservation of nature in Canadian history.
Canada's $500 million investment in a new Canada Nature Fund, which was launched last fall. The Nature Fund is facilitating an array of new partnerships that are enabling Canadians to protect and conserve Canada's important ecosystems. The federal government's contribution to the fund will be matched by partners, thereby supporting at least $1 billion in conservation actions. Today's focus is on Canada's land and freshwater conservation target, known as Target 1, recognizing that the Canada Nature Fund will also support Canadians to work towards the country's complete suite of 2020 conservation targets, protecting and recovering species at risk, improving biodiversity, and contributing to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, as well as the sustainability of local communities. The Nature Fund is already supporting projects that will quickly add to Canada's protected and conserved areas. Specifically, funding of $14.5 million was allocated from the fund last year to near-ready or strategically important protected areas projects. The purpose of these quick start projects is to build momentum for meeting Canada's commitment to protect and conserve important sites for biodiversity. A number of projects have been announced, including the recently established new provincial wildland park in Alberta called Kitsaskino Nuwenenene, the Birch Cove Blue Mountain Municipal Park in Halifax, as well as protected lands around Georgian Bay. A map providing the location of 20 Quick Start projects can be found on our website. The Canada Target 1 Challenge is the largest component of the Canada Nature Fund. This was launched in early December through an open call for proposals and will allocate up to $175 million over the next 4 years to projects that lead to the direct establishment of new protected and conserved areas across Canada. The federal government will work with provinces and territories, Indigenous people, and with the private and not-for-profit sectors to advance Canada's commitment to protect 17% of our lands and inland waters by the end of 2020. Target 1 Challenge projects will increase the number of protected and conserved areas and also expand existing areas to enhance the ecological integrity and connectivity of Canada's network of protected and conserved areas, as called for by this committee and in the international report I mentioned earlier. They will protect and conserve provincial and territorial crown land, private lands, and Indigenous lands located across Canada. 148 Target 1 Challenge proposals were submitted by the March 29th deadline, coming from provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, Indigenous people, and non-governmental organizations. The proposals are currently being evaluated based on a number of objectives and criteria established for the initiative. In parallel, the Natural Heritage Conservation Program, announced by Minister McKenna in Toronto on April 23rd, will provide an additional $100 million from the Nature Fund to enable a coordinated approach to the acquisition of private lands and interests in lands for conservation. Every dollar of federal funding in the NHCP will be matched by a minimum of $2 of funding from non-federal sources, including in-kind matching, such as donations of land. Including this match, the Natural Heritage Conservation Program will invest more than $300 million in conserving nature. The government is also using the Nature Fund to support the work of partners on new and existing national wildlife areas, including the recently announced Scott Islands Marine National Wildlife Area and the Adege Indigenous Protected Area that will be designated as a national wildlife area in 2020. On the margins of the recent Nature Champions Summit, Minister McKenna announced the intent to create 3 new national wildlife areas involving 27 islands in the St. Lawrence River near Montreal, and also a new national wildlife area for Île-Haute in Nova Scotia. Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada continues to work collaboratively with provinces, territories, national Indigenous representative organizations, and others through the Pathway to Canada Target 1 process. A major step forward was taken with the release of the One with Nature report in February 2019. This report, supported by all federal, provincial, territorial deputy ministers, provides a guiding framework of policy definitions and tools to enable progress on Target 1. On April 25th of 2019, Environment and Climate Change Canada announced that significant new progress has been made against Target 1 since the end of 2017. Since that time, Canada has increased the proportion of land and fresh water that is protected and conserved from 10.5 to 11.8%. This increase is equivalent to the size of Greece. En venant en aide à des partenaires, le gouvernement.
By supporting others, the government is strengthening and better protecting networks of protected and conserved areas in support of biodiversity, all while contributing to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and the sustainability of local communities. In the 2017 report, the committee recommended that the Government of Canada set even more ambitious targets for protected areas than those targets established to date. A survey led by Abacus Data showed that Canadians of all generations support protecting and conserving natural spaces in Canada. And Canadians also support our commitment to biodiversity goals.
20, and the parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity have embarked on a process to develop a new framework with an updated set of global targets for the post-2020 period. Progress made towards the 17% target and the productive relationships that have formed with provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, and with the not-for-profit and private sectors position Canada well to contribute to the international discussions that are underway. Indeed, Canada is co-chairing the working group internationally that's developing the new Global Biodiversity Framework for post-2020, which is expected to be considered for decision at an October 2020 meeting of the Conference of Parties to that convention in Kunming, China. L'établissement de nouvelles aires protégées et de conservation dans tout le pays.
Establishing new protected and conserved areas across the country and contributing to the protection and recovery of species at risk is an important part of the government's plan for environmental sustainability and protection. The Nature Fund is supporting Canadians from across the country to realize broadly shared objectives, all while recognizing the important relationship between a healthy environment, healthy people, and sustainable development.
Question that we'll have with you. We go now to Mr. Nadler and his colleague, Mr. Murray from Parks Canada, for your opening comments.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to speak today. As you mentioned, my name is Michael Nadler. I'm the interim Chief Executive Officer at Parks Canada, and I'm joined by David Murray, who's a key part of our establishment team, primarily focused on northern parks and protected places. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before committee today. Parks Canada is pleased to play a role in conservation nationally, and specifically in playing a role in the implementation of the historic investments announced in Budget 2018 and discussed by Niall just a moment ago. We're working with a broad array of partners to advance conservation across Canada and achieve international targets for biodiversity and the establishment of protected places. The work that the government is undertaking today on conservation will help to ensure that Canada is maintaining and growing a national network of protected landscapes that will support biodiversity and care for our uniquely varied ecology for generations to come. Je vais parler de 4 exemples de notre.
I will give you 4 examples of our work. First, lands. Up to now, Parks Canada is proud to contribute 3.3% of protected lands in Canada. Our national parks are located in each of Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories. So they're all over Canada. These protected areas are increasingly the fruit of partnerships with other communities, provinces and territories, but especially with Indigenous peoples. And while our parks are not explicitly called Indigenous protected areas, they have increasingly adopted the principles behind the concept.
With Indigenous peoples and the government of the Northwest Territories to complete the final steps required to establish Thaidene National Park Reserve in the Northwest Territories on the east arm of Great Slave Lake. And we are working with First Nations in the province of British Columbia to establish a national park reserve in the South Okanagan-Smilkameen region, which will protect some of Canada's largest, or some of Canada's last grassland habitats. These are one of the most endangered ecosystems worldwide. Sur le front maritime, Parcs Canada apporte une contribution.
On the marine front, Parks Canada has made a significant contribution towards Canada's commitment to protect 10% of the nation's marine and coastal areas by 2020.
Of Nunavut and the Inuit of Nunavut's Baffin region, the Qikiqtani Inuit Association, signed a memorandum of understanding setting the boundaries of Canada's largest ever conservation area, Talrutiep-Amanga in Lancaster Sound. This area spans some 109,000 square kilometers and includes one of Canada's most diverse aquatic ecosystems. Parks Canada is working closely with partners in Nunavut and within the federal family to move from interim protection achieved in 2017 for this very special place toward the permanent establishment of Talrutiep-Amanga in the near offing. Moreover, we are also working with federal, territorial, and Inuit partners to assess the feasibility of creating several marine protected areas in the high Arctic basin. This area of Canada's last ice is an important conservation target due to the presence of multi-year pack ice upon which many species rely. These are just 4 of the many protected areas establishment initiatives that Parks Canada is pursuing at this time. Ces initiatives marquent non seulement des gains importants en
These initiatives I've described mark not only significant conservation gains, but also important examples of Crown Indigenous reconciliation. Parks Canada is proud of its accomplishments. We are proud to protect and share land with Canadians. Most of all, we are proud to work in collaboration with communities, provinces, territories, and most of all, Indigenous groups. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent, and thank you for those updates from the Parks Canada Agency. So with that, we're going to get into our rounds of questions and answers. Each of our members will have up to 6 minutes. And so our first set of questions goes to Mr. Amos.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our public servants. It was said by Mr. O'Day that the investment made by the federal government in the 2017 budget of $1.3 billion over 4 years was the single largest investment in nature, in conservation of nature in Canadian history. How does that investment compare with the investments made, say, in the decade prior?
That's a good question, Mr. Amos, and I actually don't have that precise information in front of me. I think the value of this one-time and focused investment is the degree to which it has leveraged not only been an investment in and of itself, but also leveraged contributions from other parties. So I think what we've seen, particularly with the establishment of the Canada Nature Fund, is a strong interest from others in making contra-party donations, whether those be foundations or other levels of government or the private sector, and that not only is a federal investment of nature, but brings more capital into the space of nature conservation in a way that allows us to advance those priorities.
Thank you. I would appreciate it if written submission could be provided indicating the extent to which this is historic in comparison with recent investments, and it need not be restricted only to the previous 10 years. It could be the previous 20, as you see fit. I wonder about the Target 1 Nature Fund and the applications that are going through that process. In our region of the Outaouais, in the National Capital Region on the Quebec side of the Ottawa River, there is a significant and very exciting proposal that has been advanced, which proposes conservation in a series of areas, all within the National Capital Region. One section would be around the Des Moines, Noir, and Coulonge rivers. Another would be around the Boucher Forest, or the Forêt Boucher. And the other would be around the Shaw Falls or Saut des Chats area. There's also a section for the McLaren Bay. So there's a series of areas that are being grouped together, which represents, I think, just the submission of this proposal represents a significant achievement, because all conservation groups from across the Outaouais realize that individually they probably wouldn't get there, but if they gathered their forces and prioritized, that they would be able to put together a very strong proposal. So on their behalf, I'd like to ask, what kind of timeline will decisions be made on, and will there be representation from across Canada in the decisions made for that Nature Fund?
Thank you for the question. So we've, as I mentioned, seen 148 final proposals come into the Target 1 Challenge, so a very strong field, and close to, or just over $800 million in requested funding for $175 million that we have available to us, so a strong field. In terms of the process, we're looking to move quite fast. So we've gone through a rigorous review process, both at the regional level to ensure that regional representation, and now at the national level, and are working in the next couple of weeks to put forward a recommendation to our minister with the plan that she be positioned to make a decision on those recommendations in June. So we would be expecting news quite soon on the current suite of proposals we have before us.
Okay, that's actually very, very exciting. I'm very pleased to hear that you've been able to marshal the resources necessary. I can't imagine it's been easy with 149 proposals and having to bring both the scientific and the financial analysis to bear.
And I'd be remiss in not noting the massive support that our colleagues at Parks have provided to us in that exercise.
Thank you. And I wonder, in that same vein, because you're comparing projects that don't only have a conservation value, but also have a partnership value. Because as you said, for the first time, the federal government is investing in a manner that leverages its funds towards initiatives that don't simply involve the federal government, but that go far beyond municipalities, non-governmental organizations, indigenous peoples, etc. To what extent is the uniqueness or the quality of the particular relationships that are in question, the collaborations that are in question, to what extent does that play an important factor in decision making?
It's a good question. So I think two dimensions that I would speak to. One, Indigenous reconciliation is a key purpose of the Nature Legacy and a key focus in our review of proposals. So seeing Indigenous leadership, whether it be in the co-management of a given area or even leading the management of that area, is an aspect of our review of those proposals. The other piece where partnerships and unique partnerships come in is with respect to the matching funding that's identified, or the matching resources that are identified for specific proposals. And some of the stronger proposals we've seen are those that bring together a diverse match of funding, of both funding and resources from a variety of partners. So those, when you speak to uniqueness, that's where it emerges from.
Great, thank you. We'll move over to Monsieur Gaudin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, sir, for joining us today. Let's look at the timeline. In 2010, we had the Aichi Objectives, the Convention on Biological Diversity of the United Nations. In 2015, Canada, the provinces and territories, announced an agreement on Canada's goals and objectives for diversity, Pathway 2020. 2020 was the goal, and the goal was to have over 17% of inland waters and lands protected, and to protect 10% of coastal and marine areas. Now, we're in the month of May 2019, and where do we stand? Where do we stand in relation to those goals? Are we on track? Will we meet our goals? Will we do even better, or are we lagging behind? Very good question, thank you, and I will do my best to answer. We are getting there. In April, we announced that we had increased our achievements to 11.8%, up from 10.5%. That was thanks to combined efforts of provinces and territories to establish new protected areas. It was also thanks to our own quick start efforts and the funding we put into that. The challenge is a major project stream to fast track us from 11.8 to 17%. I won't pretend that it's not a challenge. We have a major challenge ahead of us, but we are on track. And we will further increase the percentages by other gains thanks to the fund. Provincial and territorial protected areas will be considered as well. And the resources in the Challenge Fund have helped enormously. I'd like to add to that. To answer Mr. Amos's question, well, we have our goals, which are very important, of course, but there are other pieces of the puzzle to meet the Aichi resolutions. There will be more to do to protect biodiversity in Canada and worldwide. One other aspect of our project that is underway and going well is interjurisdictional collaboration to together protect different areas and protect the habitats of animals and endangered animals. We will, of course, have to concentrate on our goals and targets, but other aspects of HE are equally important. Canada is working together as a nation to meet those targets. I think that you're right. You're right when you say that the targets are just one element. Canada and other countries are working to improve their vigilance and their track record when it comes to the environment, and so we are giving ourselves the means to do so. But let's get back to my question. May 2019, today, when we talk about inland protection areas, the goal of 17%, and coastal and marine areas, the goal is to protect 10%. Now, today, please, could you tell me where we are at? We are just 8 months away from 2020. 8 months left, plus 12, 20 months. So where are we at with these percentages relative to the targets? Yes, of course. As for land areas, we're up to 11.8% of them that are protected. And as for marine areas, we've protected just over 8%. Thus, we have just under 2% more for marine areas to accomplish. As for lands, we have another 5% to protect. How does Canada fare as compared with other countries when it comes to the goals and targets that countries have set for themselves? Where do we stand? Are we ahead of the game? Are we lagging behind? Are we about average? Do we, like other countries, face issues and challenges that make it such that we can't meet our targets? For the marine and coastal areas, we only have 2% more to go. Maybe we'll meet that goal by 2020. But as for the 6%, let's be honest, let's be really honest, we're not going to meet that goal in 20 months. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I really don't think we're going to meet that goal by 2020. I'd really like to know, though, where does Canada stand in all this? Of course. Every year, we report to the Biological Diversity Convention with regard to our targets. There are 20 identified targets. I'd say that we are on track for most of the targets. As for land areas, protected land areas, well, we have some catch up to do, and that's why we have the Nature Fund investments to be able to progress fairly quickly. And we are optimistic that we'll be able to meet the goal on time.
Thank you. It's good to see several of you again and appreciate the work that you do every day. When we completed our report, there were a couple of things that we were wondering about. One was ultimately what might count towards the protected area land. And I'm wondering whether, what kind of decision was made on what sort of lands would count towards the 17% particularly, and 10% less so.
So happy to speak to that, and Michael, feel free
please.
to add. So I spoke briefly in my remarks to the Pathway to Canada Target 1 process, which was a federal, provincial, territorial, Indigenous exercise to look at, in part, precisely at that question, to provide guidance that would be shared across Canada about what counted or not towards our 17% target. In that context, we've actually developed shared Canadian guidance in the One with Nature report that's now available online that sets out the definitions for protected areas, for other effective area-based conservation measures and for Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And I think in the space of, likely your question is most focused on that middle category, which is the other effective area-based conservation measures. This is looking at working landscapes whose primary purpose may not be for biodiversity conservation, but as a result of the way that they're managed, they result in biodiversity conservation outcomes. So a key example that we've actually established in partnership with the Department of National Defense recently is CFB Shiloh in Manitoba. And that's a site where D&D operations have for a long time taken pains to ensure biodiversity conservation in the large areas of that base that are not regularly used for training operations. And that is an area that is now a contributor to Canada Target 1.
Okay, so you're comfortable with the criteria? Was it drawn from the IUCN criteria? Okay. Yeah, I used to work with Manitoba Park, so know where Shiloh is.
Okay,
for sure.
okay, so I hope it meets your standard as well.
The Target 1, is it both lands and marine proposals, or is it strictly land for this Target 1 proposal that closed recently?
For the Challenge Fund, the focus is terrestrial and freshwater.
Freshwater.
Yeah, and DFO is making, as Department of Fisheries and Oceans, is making significant investments in its own regard for
Separate from
marine
that.
protected areas, as is Parks Canada. I don't know if you want to
And,
speak to Talbot.
MP Stetsky, to respond a little bit as well to your first question, as we know from the experience at Rouge National Park, as we're learning on consultations in near your riding in Oswego around South Okanagan, it is possible to achieve conservation gains even when the land is being used for other purposes like ranching or farming in Rouge National Park. So these other conservation measures are effective. We're learning and we're refining our approaches to conservation as a consequence. We're advancing a number of marine initiatives right now. In fact, just recently signed an MOU with the Inuit of the Baffin region, Kekikani Inuit Association, and the government of Nunavut on a feasibility assessment for a significant marine protected area in the high Arctic. So this area of last ice, which would contribute significantly to the targets.
Okay. Now, there were two groups set up to sort of run proposals through, I guess might be one way to put it. One was sort of an NGO group, and the other was an Indigenous group. How are those groups being used as part of all establishing these 10% and 17%?
So the two groups, there was a national advisory panel, which would be the NGO led group, and as well as the Indigenous Circle of Experts. So both groups produced reports that have been foundational to the work that we are currently undertaking. So they provided advice that fed into the production of the One with Nature report that I previously referred to. In particular, the Indigenous Circle of Experts was a significant contributor to the definitions of Indigenous protected and conserved areas that exist within the One with Nature report. We have also continued to receive advice and input from not from those groups in that form, because they were disbanded once those particular activities were concluded, but from the membership of those groups in terms of the approaches to developing Indigenous protected and conserved areas within Canada, the further elaboration of that concept, as well as with respect to partnering effectively with foundations to provide support to new protected and conserved areas that are proposed as a part of our Canada Nature Fund.
So
The committee shouldn't underestimate its own influence, though. Your own report helped us to shape many of these concepts, too. So we truly appreciate your work in that area.
the other concern we had was whether staffing levels would keep up or expand along with the work. How are things happening with staffing in your organizations?
So happy to speak to the Canadian Wildlife Service context. It's been a very busy year since the funding we received through Budget 2018. We're expecting a growth of roughly 200 FTEs to support the initiative, and have made rapid progress to staff up those positions.
Is that collectively with Parks Canada? as
Parks
well?
Canada has a separate allocation of it's $220.8 million over 5 years. That's restoring some capacity that had been reduced in past years, but also as we've been observing collectively, I think in this meeting, the targets themselves and the HE commitments are changing the way we view connectivity and biodiversity, and management in that space requires new skills and new abilities and new approaches. And so we're bringing in capacity to work on connectivity and collaboration across jurisdictions on biodiversity and broadly on conserving landscapes rather than individual places.
Excellent. Now we're going to move over to Mr. Fisher for his round of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks, folks. Appreciate, as always, you being here to give us an update. Niall, you mentioned our unanimous report. That's something I think that we're quite proud of, that report. And Mr. Nadler, you mentioned the impact that report had on bringing forth that $1.3 billion investment, and it's incredible. And our committee worked very hard on that report, and we had a high level of former municipal politicians. So one of the recommendations that I, and probably my colleagues that are no longer on the committee, but, well, with the exception of Mr. Stetsky, I think one of the recommendations that we were really proud of was the recommendation that the federal government partner directly with municipalities. Now, Niall, you mentioned Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes. That does give me a chance to, of course, come on to one of my favorite topics.
Never heard that before.
When we're thinking about the Quick Start program, we're thinking about the Nature Legacy, we're thinking about the Nature Fund and the huge investments in protected spaces. And again, going back to partnering with municipalities. We had the $860,000 for Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes. Do you have any examples, other examples of relationships or new partnerships with municipalities that have resulted in protected spaces?
A good question. I may ask my colleague Mark to speak a little bit to that. Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes was certainly a key one, opportunity to partner with the municipality of Halifax, Halifax Regional Municipality, I should call it, to protect 135 critical hectares of urban wilderness. I think another initiative that I can speak to is actually our efforts to have municipal protected areas recognized as such for the value that they provide. And recently, in our recent data intake for the contributions to Canada Target 1, we've seen a number of municipalities in both Alberta and BC identify parks within their municipal boundaries that do make that contribution. So that's those have been two key aspects. I mean, Rouge is another key example. Maybe, Michael, you want to speak a little bit to that?
I think, part of the journey on our work on all of the biodiversity targets and in collaboration across 3 levels of government and with Indigenous communities and others, an important takeaway is to recognize the high level of excellence that municipalities apply to conservation. And so I think we've all learned a lot, actually, from municipalities who are able to balance multiple uses and still achieve significant conservation gains within their boundaries. Blue Mountain is just one example of many, for sure.
Another example is Kejimkujik National Park, another area of land that is beloved in Nova Scotia and very beloved to my constituents as well. Recently I heard about the chain pickerel getting into the park system, eating the Keji brook trout, the Blandings turtles, the ribbon snakes. What does Parks Canada, I guess this is for Mr. Nadler, what does Parks Canada do to ensure the protection of ecological integrity of these protected areas when something like this happens?
Sure, I can speak sort of generically, then specifically on that one, though you might have seen some of the recent media coverage on the file. Ecological integrity is fundamental to every decision taken at Parks Canada. It's rooted in our legislation. It's rooted actually in the agency's establishment too. So even the legislation establishing Parks Canada as an agency makes clear reference to the importance of ecological and commemorative integrity in the management of our protected places. So it permeates all aspects of decision making and policy making in the agency and is our focus in the management of every national park. That circumstance is a really compelling example of the kinds of challenges we're facing that simply can't be solved actually within our own boundaries. We need to work with multiple jurisdictions and players to address and respond to that challenge. There are some initiatives that we're undertaking ourselves. You might have seen that we're separating off an area in Keji so that we can try to restore species that are actually being outcompeted by this invasive pickerel. It's a really aggressive invasive species and actually a real threat to the ecological integrity of the aquatic area of the entire park.
So our government is doing a whole lot of things to combat climate change. This massive investment in protected areas, what impact does that have on mitigating climate change?
Happy to speak to that, MB Fisher. So it's interesting. There was a recent report in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science that spoke to the contributions that natural, nature-based solutions can make to climate change, and attributed some 37% of the climate mitigation solution potentially existing in the preservation and enhancement of our existing natural environments. So that's things like conserving wetlands, peatlands, and forests, which represent some of the most significant carbon stores currently on the planet, and that can also help with climate adaptation, so ensuring the resilience of watersheds, as well as the resilience of coastlines to coastal erosion and things of that nature. So there's many contributions that nature can make to climate, and of course, preserving a stable climate system is critical, particularly to the protection of species at risk.
Do I have 10 seconds? If we didn't have that recommendation to partner with municipalities, would places like Blue Mountain, Birch Cove be able to expand like they did?
No, if that's the 10-second answer.
Okay, there you go. Monsieur Godin, back to you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier mon...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank my colleague, Mr. Fisher, for having mentioned the committee's unanimous report. I think that shows our will to take necessary action to protect our environment and to work to decrease our environmental footprint. We want to act against climate change. There's something I'd like to know. Earlier, I found something at the beginning of your speaking notes. I don't know whether you actually said it, but you've written a certain sum. Allow me to find it. 175 million. This is in Mr. Odine's speech. You said that Canada would allocate $175 million over the next 4 years. I'm wondering something. The sums invested in the past decade, that's what I'm wondering about. The past decade, during which time we've had these ice sheet goals. I'm wondering, have we really made the best possible use of our investments? Have we leveraged them? I'll reformulate to get a more tangible answer. The sums invested to meet our goals. Well, how many millions and billions of thousands and millions? How much money are we talking about? I don't know if you can give me precise figures, but how many millions does it take for a 1% improvement? I'm not sure whether I've been clear. Do you need 200 million for 2%, or is 100 million sufficient, or is it rather 2 billion? How much does it take? Concretely, can we quantify how much money it takes? Once again, great question, but this one is rather difficult to answer. Allow me to give you a bit of context. In the north, it costs less than it does in the south to protect each hectare. In the south, though, there are many endangered species, in fact, the most endangered species. Thus, it's necessary to concentrate on that a bit more. As for the cost per hectare protected and conserved, well, it varies greatly. Relative to our targets, well, In fact, we have major targets. We need to ensure that the network of protected spaces is connected. All the spaces must be interconnected. And we must also have a good representation of the diversity of habitats and species in Canada. Thus, it's difficult to quantify the exact value, the exact investment that will lead to the best results. One thing's for sure. Let's talk about the past 10 years and today. Many have committed themselves to support these efforts. The Natural Areas Conservation Program, a past program, it had a 2-to-1 matched funding to support Southern Canadian spaces. Yes, but let's talk about investments from 2010 through today and our gains, our accomplishments. Are there areas of lower density and other areas of higher density? Yes, of course, but Canada is a pretty unique country. We all know that it's the second largest country by surface area in the world. We are not similar to European countries with high population density. Do you have any numbers about that? No, I don't have any on hand, but we could send you some. That would be great. Would it be possible for you to send some numbers to the committee? Very simple figures. Federal government investments since 2010, as well as our gains when it comes to land protection and coastal protection. Yes, absolutely, we can send you that. On a different note, during your speech, your presentation rather, you mentioned that there is a wildlife reserve project in 27 islands, 27 îles near the St. Lawrence in Montreal. April 25th and 26th, there's a summit in Quebec, and this is a series of islands. We're working on this project with the Port of Montreal, as well as with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. There are areas there that will be transferred from the Port of Montreal to Environment and Climate Change Canada. Then we will be able to establish a new national wildlife reserve. Thank you. Do we have an estimate for results, for our gains in land protection as a result of this project you've just mentioned? Yes, of course, there are 27 islands with a total of 775 hectares. And that includes Boucherville, Varennes, Verchères, Lac Saint-Pierre. Yes, but the gains, concretely, what's the percentage? Well, and it'll take many zeros. Sometimes, as we've said, a very small area could be of great symbolic importance or of great importance for spaces, for biodiversity. Mr. Chair.
Chair, thanks for the great presentation. The issue of biodiversity, the concern around the large number of species at risk of extinction in the world is a huge concern to Davenport residents. And so I have a lot of letters that come from constituents, and one of them had written to me and said, please use your voice in Parliament to make radical, immediate change to respond to these findings. And what she's doing is she's referring to an article that The Guardian wrote, I think just a couple of weeks ago, about scientists reveal 1 million species at risk of extinction in a damning UN report. And then she goes on to say, we need to enlist the best conservation scientists we have to stem the tide of extinction in Canada and support other similar initiatives around the world. So my first question is our historic $1.3 billion investment in nature conservation stemming the tide of extinction in Canada? And if so, how?
a good question. I'll answer it in part and ask Michael to speak to the Parks Canada contribution. It's a big question. Yes, I think it's giving us a unique opportunity in two primary senses. One is this work towards the establishment of new protected and conserved areas, which in their establishment provide values for a whole series of species at risk. The other dimension is, of course, that we're enabled through this new funding to advance a transformed approach to species at risk conservation in Canada, which is moving from a species by species approach to a multi-species approach focused in priority places, on priority species where those exist, and on priority threats and sectors. So that new form of engagement with provinces and territories, with private sector, with Indigenous peoples, is enabling us to accelerate multi-species action plans that allow us to better use the investments we're making and that others are making to advance that progress. Also, it's given us the opportunity to lead at an international level. So I mentioned our chairmanship of the open-ended working group under the Convention on Biological Diversity. This investment gives the profile to Canada and the legitimacy to Canada in our international engagements to help drive ambition in that broader global conversation, and that's certainly our hope as we head towards Kunming in 2020. But Michael, would you like to add?
Yeah, and again, one of the transformative elements of that funding, of those investments, is that they are bringing together multiple jurisdictions, Indigenous groups, a much broader collectivity of interests in responding to what is a very serious situation, as your constituent observed, and transforming the management of species and conservation from within the boundaries of individual protected areas to looking at landscapes and really respecting the fact that animals don't care much about our boundaries, right?
Interject there. One of the other questions that came up, hold on, is this on? No. One of the other questions that came up at my last climate action town hall was whether or not we're protecting species across borders. So does that, when you're talking that they don't care about sort of our lines, but they have their landscapes, are we also protecting across borders? So that would include, I guess the immediate border is the U.S. one.
Or even provincial ones.
Oh, of course.
Right. We manage ecological spaces at Parks Canada that traverse boundaries, and it really is important to be able to work effectively with multiple provinces, multiple communities, for that matter.
Across the U.S., Canada.
Yeah, and even with the United States. And so, and I guess in some ways the Convention on Biodiversity is really focused on bringing nations together around these issues, and there are a number of initiatives in which we play a part that are looking at the movement of species and even just the climate change is causing shifts in ecosystems. Right, they're not respecting the original boundaries of protected places either because of the changing climate. So we've had to reshape how we approach collaboration across borders and jurisdictional boundaries.
So just to be clear, just because I'm always asked, what are you doing now? So do we actually have some initiatives right now in terms of cross borders? And we're hoping to do more. And I think you gave the great example of the work that we're doing sort of internationally, which I think will sort of help to increase the amount of work that we do across borders. So we are doing some things right now.
Yeah, so I think a key example, a concrete example, would be the North American Wetlands Management Program, and that is a longstanding collaboration with the U.S. that actually sees a lot of U.S. counterpart funding come to support the conservation and protection of wetlands in Canada. I think some. Don't pin me on the number, but some $800 million has been provided to that through that fund over the years to support wetland conservation.
And how do we compare to other countries in terms of protecting our biodiversity? So how are we doing? So if I look at our top, I don't know, top 5 countries that have a lot of biodiversity, how are we doing in terms of protecting our biodiversity and our species that we have here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are on par. If we look at the international reporting, I think we're on par, if not better than many. But none of us are doing great. There are close to 600 species on the endangered species list in Canada, and that's in part, a matter of identification and quantification, but it's also revealing of the challenge. So that's a small part of that 1 million species challenge that's been noted by the international group. But it's certainly an area where we all have continued room for improvement and a global challenge that I think we're taking efforts to address currently.
I think we've got one more, Mark. Yes, go ahead.
Just to add a little bit to Niall's comments, I mean, one of the things that people are really excited about, in terms of Canada's approach, is the bringing together of the species and the spaces in the Nature Fund as a kind of holistic approach of managing these issues together, looking at cross-border issues, as you say, looking at it nationally, looking at it regionally and locally. And, I think that's kind of what's generated a lot of excitement, as well as the really tremendous progress that's been made on a hectare basis, both terrestrially and in terms of the ocean targets. I mean, we were at 2%, I think, a few years ago, and we're getting to 8%. There's been a real push, and thanks to the committee's help, kind of all-party support and tremendous support on the part of Canadians to really kind of make progress.
Great, thank you. We're going to come over now. We have time, 6 minutes for Mr. Abdeltaif and Mr. Hoback, if you'd like to divide up the time however you'd like.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Conservation finance in Canada. There's we've got a document here that there's 5 areas where finance can be available to, first of all, to deal with environment, enhance the environment responsibility. In the meantime, generate jobs and so forth. It's all good. Green bonds, eco-tourism, conservation fees, renewable energy development, debt restructuring, and carbon offsets. Have any of these areas been tackled? And have you done any calculation over what the cost or anticipated cost can be for any government to take on this program? And have you any, how optimistic you are over a good result out of practicing such thing?
It's a good question. There are, I think we are in early days of working on conservation finance. So the traditional financing of conservation through government, foundation, and other resources is well established. I think an area that we focused on in the recent Nature Summit was a discussion on innovative finance mechanisms for nature conservation, and there is progress on that happening globally. These are things like looking at how something like wetland or peatland conservation could contribute a carbon offset that would be counted within a kind of cohesive carbon trading system. It can include things, the Seychelles, so the Environment Minister of the Seychelles joined us in Montreal and spoke to a debt for nature swap. So where with international financing organizations, they were able to exchange sovereign debt for a commitment to a certain percentage of nature conservation. Likely not a similar challenge for Canada, but certainly on a global basis, a legitimate avenue of pursuit. And there are also values. I mean, I think certainly the private sector, companies like Shell, have expressed strong interest in exploring opportunities for nature-based solutions. Often that comes in looking at where an offset for an existing industrial activity could be provided through something like conserving an area of forest or conserving an area of wetland for the long term in exchange for the development of a resource project of one kind or another. So there are a series of pieces of work under development. I'd say it is early days, and in terms of the actual quantification of what that could provide in the Canadian context, it's something on which we are working to deepen our analysis currently.
Well, these programs have two folds. One of them is engaging the private sector in helping away from the government direct involvement in assisting or in supporting the efforts to deal with the environmental challenges. On the other side, there will be other examples around the world that they can be beneficial. for us to take on something like this. I mean, we can look at similar economies under the G7 or the G20, or I mean, advanced countries to learn from. So, are you aware of any good example that Canada can look at in that perspective? And why not speeding up? Because I believe engaging the private sector on programs like this could speed up to get to the target faster than on a government initiative.
Maybe just to add what Niall's saying, I mean, there's lots of experimentation happening in the United States. Green bonds, particularly at the municipal level, state level, they've been, a place where we've seen a lot of experimentation, and Canada's looking at what's happening in many places in the U.S. In that respect. Endowments have been discussed quite a bit in this space. The Rainforest Trust in BC, an example in Canada of one. Certainly, lots of interest in potentially looking at that in the future as well. We are working on this. It is complicated. At the same time, we're managing, the Canada Nature Fund and moving funding into communities. We are very much interested in the innovation space and plan to do more work on this, including looking at places like the United States and elsewhere for inspiration.
Yeah, thanks for your time, guys, and I appreciate the information. One of the things we're seeing in Saskatchewan with these funds coming in buying property is they're not taking local expertise in context. Like, I use an example down in southwestern Saskatchewan where we've got a bunch of ranchers where lots of grasslands have been purchased, and instead of working with the ranchers, they've gone on their own way, and they've upset the local community, they've upset everybody else, and really didn't get the desired results in protecting the environment. Where we've got other examples where they worked with the ranchers and worked with the community and all of a sudden had the desired results. So what is your process in making sure, as you're administering these funds, that we're actually going to achieve the results and we're going to include the entire community in that area that those funds would be spent at?
So thanks for the question. As Niall mentioned in his opening remarks, I mean, the foundation for everything we're doing really is partnership, and we are going to be supporting projects with federal dollars that have the ability to demonstrate partnership and consultation, collaboration. That's really inherent and endemic in what we're trying to do here.
You've been doing that. What kind of evidence are you showing? Because what I'm concerned about is you got a lot of money to spend, and they got a lot of money to spend themselves, and they may be more focused on spending the money than actually getting the achieved results.
Yeah. So one of the things we've done as part of the proposal phase is we've actually asked for letters of support from partners. So we want to see demonstrations of support in the community for various proposals for protected areas, and we are giving a certain degree of points for the amount of in our assessments for proposals that have strong partnership. And so we recognize that it takes everyone, and some partnerships do take time to kind of build, and we obviously want to reward and put our money behind those projects that have strong partnership and collaboration.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Bosio, you have the mic next.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you very much for being here today. It's great information. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk about, so I'll try to go quickly. I really commend the investments through the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Ducks Unlimited. In my own riding, the Napanee Alvar, the Nature Conservancy has bought a big chunk of that land. It's having a huge impact on the endangered species, the eastern loggerhead shrike, which is really important to our region, and I'm really proud of the fact that we've gone to great lengths to protect this species. And it highlights a big part of the report in corridors, right? Protective corridors for wildlife. We see that in the west, not so much in the east. I know that in the report we talked, Will Amos and myself spoke about corridor between Algonquin, La Vérendrye, and Adirondacks. And I know a number of people, a number of groups are trying to do that, but the conservation authorities are actually an organization that could play a really strong role in Ontario, and especially Eastern Ontario. But unfortunately, as you heard, the Ford government has cut funding. for the conservation authorities. Just at a time of flooding, massive flooding that's happening in Eastern Ontario this year and in past years is cutting to the bone there. And the problem for the local conservation authorities is they'd love to buy this land, but their operational funding keeps getting less and less and less every year. Is there anything that we can do as a government to help offset that so that we can take advantage of this incredible resource to try to build that further connectivity and corridors in Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and upper state New York?
So thank you for the question. It's certainly a strong emphasis within the investments that we're making to look to enhance connectivity between existing protected areas where we can. And I think, as you note, there are a number of players who have interest in land, including conservation authorities, who can help to make some of those linkages. I've seen maps of various places in Canada, including Ontario, that show the kinds of contributions that these small landholders or land managers can make to creating those critical connections for wildlife. I think in the context of our current funding envelopes, those types of proposals are eligible and welcomed. It'll be, I think,
Operational support, though, or just for the purchase of the land?
For the purchase of the land is the predominant focus of our effort, and that's the I think the reality of the current push that we're in, which is to seek that opportunity for protected areas and conserved areas establishment.
Okay, thank you. It's certainly something we need to consider. I think down the road, and something I think in our next mandate we'll try to push forward because the value is there to do it. Another big area that has happened recently is the cut of 50 million trees program in Ontario and the impact of that. Once again, the flooding that we're seeing happening, soil erosion that is happening, we don't need to be cutting tree plantings. We need to be increasing tree plantings. And the Ford government, once again, doesn't seem to understand that in the conditions of climate change that we're dealing, the reductions in emissions that trees can provide, the soil, the elimination of soil erosion that they can provide, under drier conditions, the retention of moisture in the soils helps our farmlands as well. So all of these things are a valuable resource. In fact, Rob Keane of the CEO Forest Ontario, his comment was, we need to realize that to have a healthy economy and a healthy society, we need healthy forests. To have healthy forests for our future, we need to plant more trees. To date, the 50 million tree program has planted 27 million trees, or 15,000 hectares of new forest. On average, this means that every year the program has planted 2.5 million trees on approximately 4,000 properties. And according to the 2019 Environment Commission report, average forest cover in southern Ontario stands at 26%, with some areas seeing as low as 5% of forest cover. The report identified that 30% of the lands needs to be planted with trees to restore forest cover in southern Ontario to optimal levels. That equates to roughly 680,000 hectares. Can you provide a viewpoint that here we're making significant investments in protected spaces in order to grow our forests and grow the ability to tackle climate change, both from an adaptation standpoint and a mitigation standpoint through the emissions reduction?
Sure.
Maybe just to respond to your question, as Niall mentioned, the focus on Target 1 Challenge is really on hectares and land acquisition. There is some space for restoration and stewardship of the landscape inside those projects. So it's not just all about land securement. Environment Climate Change Canada does have other programs, though, that do support restoration, including some of the species at risk programming that we've discussed, as well as the Habitat Stewardship Program, which does support land reclamation, land restoration. But provinces do play a very important role here in managing lands and forests, and we work where we are funding. We try to work as closely as possible with those jurisdictions.
And finally, I just wanted to add, I guess, you know, when we talk about what we've accomplished towards meeting our HE targets, going from 1% to 8% of marine protected areas in the last 3.5 years it's incredible. It's remarkable the amount of ground you've been able to accomplish in that short period of time. And in the land increasing by 2%, I mean, you said it yourself, it's the size of Greece, to put things into perspective. Would you say, given the investments and the attention that this government has made in this area, that we're fully committed to achieving those targets, and as you had mentioned yourself, that we're on target to achieve we're on a target to achieve our HE goals?
I think it's fair to say that with this recent injection of funding, we have we have a trajectory to reach those targets. I think we have the funding, we have the partnerships, and we have the land-based opportunities based on Canada's geography to make those. Which is not to say it won't be challenging, but we are optimistic that those targets will be achieved. Yes.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
we're not just committed. We're absolutely committed. Port Niall and I, we work on this stuff daily, right? But we're not alone. This effort has brought together a number of jurisdictions and interests around this objective, and so we're all rowing in the same direction. And in some ways, the scope of that collaboration is unprecedented.
And the funding was the catalyst, you'd say?
It's an important contributor for sure. Like the and I do want to underscore your report as a committee was an important contributor. There are other contributors as well, but absolutely the funding has been a contributor.
Great, thank you. Now, Mr. Sketsky, you have the final round of questions here. Your allotment is 3 minutes, but I've been fairly generous with the clock, and so I'll take that same spirit with you. So if you want to push the clock a bit, feel free to.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it to 2 questions. In my past lives, I worked with national parks, Manitoba parks, BC parks, as a public servant, working under many different governments. And so I want to, for a minute, talk about the $1.3 billion, which I was happy to work at getting signatures from other MPs in support of it. But we're coming up on an election. And I'm just interested, out of that $1.3 billion, do you have any idea how much of it has already been spent, and how much of it is election proof? And if it's not, I really encourage you to be thinking about ways over the next few months to park that money in such a way that it will survive an election regardless, to benefit conservation. So I don't know whether you can answer that or not, but 1.3 billion, how much of it's gone, how much of it is committed in such a way that regardless of an election outcome, it'll still be there for conservation?
Right. So I can answer in part, and I'll turn to Michael. I mean, I think so. The profile of the funding for personnel and other resources is relatively stable over the years of the program. So I think, reasonably speaking, we've spent roughly a fifth of that funding to date, and by the time of the election, we'll have spent another half of another fifth. In terms of the contribution funding, that's where more multi-year investments are taking place. So if you think of a $500 million Canada Nature Fund envelope, we've invested 14.5 at this stage in the Quick Start process. We expect to invest up to $175 million more in the upcoming decisions around the Target 1 challenge. And there's been a series of significant investments also made on a multi-year basis in species at risk conservation, which would I wouldn't hazard the precise number that's reached at this stage, but I think a considerable investment, likely a little over half of that existing pot has or will be committed in the coming month or so. And those, and the results of those investments we'll see over the next 4 years. But Michael, I don't know if you want to add from the parks perspective.
We're investing. I mentioned that some of that funding announced in Budget 2018 has come to Parks Canada, and we're investing now, and we'll continue to invest. And we're also on a 5-year cycle. The one thing I guess I'd observe is that the HE targets are real and present, and they'll be there in 2020, and we'll all have to continue working to achieve them. But please understand that the Convention on Biodiversity is also aware of the species challenges facing the planet, and that there will be new targets for sure. And we'll all, after 2020, probably be coming back to this committee to talk about those challenges as well and how we can work together to respond.
Yeah, I'd say I just encourage you to try and make every dollar election-proof if you can, going forward out of that 1.3 billion. And secondly, just quickly, the role of the public in terms of the new protected areas. So it wasn't 100% clear. So the committees are still there, or they're no longer there? Are they part of reviewing? Is there any public review involved with the 148 or 149 proposals? And what's the role of the public going forward once those land pieces have been selected?
So those pre-existing committees, so the NAP and the ICE, no longer exist in that form. We did receive external advice for the purpose of assessing. So it's through a separate process for the Challenge Fund proposals that came from public organizations and Indigenous peoples. So just to make sure we had a full understanding of those perspectives in supporting the expert-based advice that was coming to us through our own teams, through our work with Parks Canada and work with CERNA and other colleagues. So those have all been inputs to that decision-making process to date. In terms of the once successful projects are selected and identified, the way that public engagement happens on those will be in some manner in the hands of our partners, and in many cases those will be the provinces and territories whose crown lands many of those programs will be initiated on. So I think we'll see a variety of, I think there's something close to 50 different pieces of legislation in Canada that provide for the establishment of different forms of protected area, and the requirements of those pieces of legislation will be the kind of primary guidance for how those public consultations and engagements are then done. But Mark, did you want to add?
Maybe just to add to that, so in the proposals that have come in, many of them have mention of consultation plans. They're required to submit kind of a work plan as part of their proposal, so we can see in those proposals, whether there's consultation planned, or in some cases it's already happened, and they're looking for funding moving forward. So that's one thing that we do look for, and secondly, Environment and Climate Change Canada, as you probably well know, operates national wildlife areas, migratory bird sanctuaries. The minister has already announced our department's intent to create new ones, and so she's announced the three NWAs in Montreal and the one in Nova Scotia. We will be doing public consultations and stakeholder consultations on those NWAs, so that people have an opportunity to kind of share their views. Lots of support, obviously, so far for those NWAs, but people have questions, right, about whether they can still fish or hunt, or how they'll be impacted. So those are legitimate things that we want to look at.
End of your time, Mr. Stetsky, as well as a little bit beyond. So excellent. I want to thank each of our guests here today, our departmental officials, for joining us today and speaking so openly and clearly about some of the investments and initiatives that you have that you're underway. Thank you to each of you, your departments and your teams, for the work that you're doing on something that I think our committee sees as being very important. We've heard reference the committee report that we did that was supported by all parties, and I think it really does demonstrate how, when we work together, we can do some great things in this country and in government. And it really is exciting to see how we had money flow and support from government as well as the opposition in moving forward on conservation, both terrestrial and marine, in Canada. So I wish each of you and your respective teams well and continuing to advance this important work. As was said, we're making great progress, but there's a lot more work to be done. And I think that it'll be important in the next government that the Environment and Climate Change Committee continue pushing on this because, like I say, the work's not done and we need to keep some attention on it. But thank you for being here. Thanks for the work that you do. With that, we're going to suspend and clear the room, except for the members and staff, and then we'll come back and closed in a few minutes. We have some committee business we need to tend to. So thank you, and with that, we're suspended.